we have roll call. May we have roll call?
Good morning, Supervisor John Joya.
I'm here.
Supervisor Federal Glover.
I'm here.
And just as a note, we do have translation available into Spanish.
Okay. All right. With that, we will move to item 2, which is public comment on items not on our agenda. Speakers are limited. It should say 2 minutes rather than 3. We will give 3 here, although it's normally 2, but it's 3 today, it looks like. And just to note, if someone's here speaking on the Chevron oil spill issue, the Martinez refinery issues, or our hazardous materials notification policy, those are all on the agenda. So you would speak under those items. Otherwise, this is items not on the agenda. So is there any public comment on items not on the agenda?
If you'd like to make a public comment, please raise your hand in the Zoom app. Supervisors, we do not have any hands raised.
Okay. By the way, I just out of my own point of privilege, I always look at the attendee list to see who's participating. It's great. And I want to note, it is great to see Tom Lochner, who I haven't seen in some time. I know Tom's been writing on the Martinez issue, but Tom was a great reporter for the Contra Costa Times for many years, covering West County, and it's good to see Tom out and about. So I just wanted to say hi to Tom. That was just my personal privilege there. All right, moving on to item 3, which is to approve the minutes from the April 20th ISO ad hoc committee meeting. And we do have, you're good with that, Federal? Good. Is there any public comment on the minutes?
If you would like to make a public comment on item number 3, please raise your hand in the Zoom app. Supervisors, we have no hands raised.
Okay. All right, minutes are approved. Item 4 is to receive a status report regarding the independent incident investigation into the wharf oil spill at the Chevron refinery and provide direction as necessary. And that we do have a presentation.
Thank you, Supervisor Joya. Nicole Heath, the Director of the Hazardous Materials Division, will be making that presentation.
Great.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. The first item that I'd like to present on is the Chevron Oversight Committee update. We did open our 45-day public comment period for a draft report on the work done by Accutech for the February 9th, 2021 release. The public comment period opened on July 13th and will close on August 28th. We will shortly be putting in the chat a link to the details of how to send a public comment to our office and also a link to the report for review. We also hosted a public meeting on July 17th at the Richmond City Council chambers to have an opportunity to present out to the public on this meeting. During this 45-day public comment period, we will be collecting all comments from the public on this report, and all of the comments that we collected will be addressed and, if necessary, incorporated into the final report. The next steps on that will be that once that final report is drafted by Accutech, there will be a formal presentation to both the Board of Supervisors and also the City of Richmond on this report. And that is the end of the update. Thank you.
So I did go to that meeting at the outset and did make some opening remarks. And I know that there was a presentation and there's a public comment period into that. Can you, I know it's not in your slides here, can you briefly summarize just for the public the general findings of that report?
Sure. So the report, just so everyone is aware, was a review of the root cause analysis investigation done by the Chevron refining company. Accutech's work not only included reviewing the root cause analysis report, but also due to timing, they were able to review the action plan and implementation of the action plans, What Chevron found is that the actions that were implemented by Chevron did address the root causes of this incident, and no further actions were developed by Accutech as a result of this report. They also found that the root cause analysis report did do a thorough investigation and did identify what Accutech believed to be the root causes.
Yeah, explain the root cause briefly. I know it had to do a little bit with the whole issue of corrosion. Could you just summarize that again?
Yeah, so the root causes of this was that they found that the leak into the wharf was from a cement line piping, which was experiencing corrosion. And so some of the root causes of this were, they found that they needed to have additional inspection techniques to be able to identify this type of corrosion. There also was talk about management of change when changing to this type of piping. And a management of change is a process which documents the changes, makes sure that the team thoroughly understands the changes and identifies any additional hazards or risk as a result of the change, and also looking into any opportunities to upgrade or remove this type of piping within the refinery. And it was also determined that there is only 2 cement line pipes that are left in the refinery. One is out of service, and the line that was involved in this incident, I believe, is being replaced.
And is it being replaced with a pipe that has some level of alloys in it, not just carbon steel?
I don't remember the exact details, but I will find out and we can report back on that.
I mean, as Supervisor Glover will recall, because we were around then, that there was a U.S. Chemical Safety Board investigation report out of the 2012 Chevron fire. And coming out of that, there was a identification of the need to install what are called inherently safer systems. And we amended the industrial safety ordinance on that because remember that one of the causes of that fire was a corroded pipe. And I think coming out of that was, a recommendation to have pipes that had some level of alloys in them. I mean, to the average person, we think of stainless steel. It may not be stainless steel in that case, but it's something more than carbon steel, right? It has a level of corrosion resistance through alloys in the pipe. Or what I guess the refineries would call it's alloyed up. So given that was an issue in 2012, it appears that that the corrosion was an issue here. And can you comment about that, Nicole? I mean, given that we now have the inherently safer system provision in the ordinance where facilities are to look at installing what is considered an inherently safer system. And in the case of the piping, it meant piping that was more corrosion resistant. So tell me about sort of why that maybe wouldn't have, this particular pipe maybe would not have been replaced. It's being replaced now, but I'm just wondering under the previous recommendations about putting more corrosion resistant pipes, can you comment about maybe why that wasn't done?
So from my understanding, I think this had to do with Chevron's what we call mechanical integrity program, or they call their fixed equipment asset strategies, and the way that they look at their damage mechanisms. The damage mechanism portion of the of the California Accidental Release Prevention Program is really what is taking a look at what drives corrosion in pipes and what opportunities there are for upgrades in piping. So I think that this was probably, from my understanding, this was something that was not identified via the damage mechanisms, but now the damage mechanisms for that line have been updated, as well as plans to update that line to carbon steel to prevent this from occurring again.
So are we, and how are we providing oversight into this process at the refinery and at other refineries, frankly, right? Because now other refineries are all required to look at inherently safer systems. That could include, more corrosion resistant piping. How are we sort of reviewing that for the 4 facilities we have in the county?
So damage mechanisms and inherently safer systems are reviewed by our engineering group at their triennial audit. So once every 3 years, the audit team will go out to the facility and do a comprehensive audit, which includes reviewing the damage mechanism reports for the units, ensuring that those damage mechanism reports have been completed, action items have been implemented, that information is given to teams for use when they're doing any changes into the facility, when they're doing their process hazard analysis. So it is really that auditing component where our team sends anywhere from 4 to 5 people, spending up to 5 or 6 weeks at the refinery, auditing these specific programs to ensure they are meeting all of the regulatory requirements.
Okay. Federal, any questions?
Yeah, so we're like 2.5 years later after this incident. What's the lag that takes place that doesn't allow us, we're at a comment period right now. What's the big lag that happens that slows this process down so much?
Yeah, so the reason for the slowdown in this process was when we do this work through an oversight committee, one of the responsibilities of the oversight committee is to select an independent third-party contractor to do the work. We rely on them for their expertise in process safety and root cause analysis and other items. When we have a third-party contractor going in, oftentimes there may be a need for there to be a non-disclosure agreement or some sort of confidentiality agreement to be signed between the two parties. And in this case, getting that confidentiality agreement to be settled on between the two parties took an extensive amount of time. We are seeing very similar issues right now with our oversight committee for the Martinez Refining Company. And we are working to be able to try and provide a pathway to get these agreements closed in a much quicker manner. In terms of confidentiality in the work that we do in a regulatory environment, every day we are dealing with confidential business information and, know exactly, what should and should not be disclosed. The Industrial Safety Ordinance and Health and Safety Code also allow for trade secret protection, and we always operate under protecting that information for facilities. So we are looking to have these things done in a much quicker manner, and we feel that the protections already afforded by the regulations provide the protections for these facilities and should address their concerns and allow our consultants who are acting as agents of the county to be able to come in and do the work necessary.
Okay, I appreciate the explanation because that certainly was going to be one of my questions and some of our later agenda items, but thank you.
All right, this is just an update. With that, is there any public comment on this item?
If you'd like to make public comment on item number 4, the Chevron update, please raise your hand in the Zoom app, or if you're on the phone, press *9. The first public commenter will be Maureen Brennan.
Hi, thank you. And thank you, Supervisor Glover, for your question, because I had the same question. It did take, 2.5 years to get this report to the public. And I understand that the ISO, as is currently written, has a huge confidentiality protection. And I'm starting to wonder if it's a little overprotective, that it's, Accutech had problems getting some of this information, and MRC Oversight Committee is going through similar issues right now, trying to get information, and MRC is resistant, but they are protected by the Industrial Safety Ordinance. So I'd love to take a look at that at some point. Is this overprotection?
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy, or excuse me, Maureen. The next speaker will be Kathy.
Okay, hello?
Hi, we can hear you.
Yes, great. As far as this, I would like to add the information that Accutech says that it was only able to do a review of Chevron's own root cause analysis. It was not able to do its own independent investigation. Can you comment on that, please?
We'll take answers at the end of the comments. Yes, thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. The next speaker will be call-in user 1.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I just wanted to say that it's very interesting. All the speakers seem to be able to ask questions that are in line with what Supervisor Joya was doing. Basically, the presenter today is basically ignored, and you are the presenter because you're the one who was leading her presentation. And that's where it is overly manipulated, and there is no disclosure. Oftentimes you do things that is extremely politically motivated, and we, the public, really don't have any recourse to have people investigate you. Why is it that a lot of speakers happen to be activists and nonprofit staff that are connected to you, or that they receive county funds from you? But in this case, you are able to use your ability to attack the presenter and her report. As the public, I have full confidence because of this lady who is being grilled by you all the time. And obviously you read everything because you have said a lot of things that is really drawing her direction of presentation. So I know that this entire case is fully and more than 100% properly investigated and disclosed, because nobody in your district, like Chevron, can survive anything otherwise. So thank you, presenter, for your presentation. And Chevron, thank you for all you do. I would just recommend that you check into your personnel. And if they disclose as Democrats, you need to be careful and make sure somebody else declared another political party. Double check, triple check, everything such as maintenance and regular replacements are done properly and on time. Thank you.
The next speaker will be Heidi Taylor.
Good morning, everyone. I want to speak to the issue of the non-disclosure agreements. I may not have a good handle on this, but what I'd like to suggest is that, is there any way that this can be figured out ahead of time so that we're not negotiating these non-disclosure agreements after an incident, but it's something that's already agreed to, like in the ISO, so that that can speed up the process. And yes, Supervisor Glover, thank you for your question. And Supervisor Joya, always appreciate your questions and comments. And so I'm just wondering if we can be more proactive ahead of time so that it makes the procedure and process go more smoothly and quicker.
Thank you.
Would anyone in the room like to speak on this item in 777 Arnold? No one in 77 and Martinez and El Cerrito, or
Nobody here. Nobody here.
No,
Okay.
no, here.
No additional public comment.
So Matt, maybe to respond to a couple of questions, I think good questions. One is the time, and they're related, the disclosure and the time issue. So maybe to start with the disclosure, the county, why don't you clarify, the county does not enter into separate non-disclosure agreements. There is a provision in the ISO on that, right? So can you explain how that ISO provision works? And it's my understanding that it pretty much codifies what the law is about non-disclosure, about business, I guess, what's the term? Trade secret or business information, confidential business information. Can you explain that provision in the ISO? And then a little more about, I know often a facility will request a separate non-disclosure agreement that goes further than what's in the ISO. And I think that's what happened here, is that originally Chevron wanted an additional non-disclosure agreement, and that held up this process on the investigation. The county did not enter, as I understand, a separate non-disclosure agreement. with Chevron, they dropped the issue and we relied on what was in the ISO. I believe that's the case. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So the industrial safety ordinance, as well as state law and regulations, require us as county officials to protect confidential business information or trade secret information. And in fact, our staff do that every day during different inspections and audits that we conduct. And we're actually bound by state law to do that. We're bound by the industrial safety ordinance to do that. The issue has been arising when the county hires an independent contractor. In this case of Chevron, it was Accutech. In the case of MRC's investigation, it's Scott Berger. When there's an additional party coming in to do the inspection or the audit or an incident investigation, Chevron has and MRC now has asserted that they want to have a separate agreement with that independent contractor that binds them to protect their confidential business information. The county has not signed any of these agreements and has not been a party to any of these agreements, but rather it's an agreement between the facility, whether it be Chevron, MRC, or any other facility, and the independent contractor that the county hires to do the root cause analysis or the investigation.
Right. And just for the pub, the provision in the ISO is really reflective of state law, right? And if we didn't have that provision, we're still essentially governed by state law with regard to non-disclosure of protected trade secret or business information. Is that correct?
That's correct. And that even applies to public information requests. We're required to protect that information.
Right. So I think it's important to note that the ISO doesn't provide any greater level of protection of this information than what is required under state law. And as we heard from Matt, the county has not entered into additional agreements, although the facilities have held up the investigation process by saying they would not go forward to provide access to information until such an agreement was signed. And I think that is what held up initially the Chevron investigation. I don't know by how many months, but did that occur there, Matt?
Yeah, I think it was just shy of a year that agreement took to work out between Accutech and Chevron.
And our message is I am critical of that delay. And I think this is an issue we need to get beyond, and it'll come up, I'm sure, in the MRC presentation, is that we need to, we want access to information as soon as possible. I think the reason the county audited, and Matt, correct me because I recall some of this, the reason the county was involved on Chevron and there wasn't a brand new investigation is because you need to collect the information as close as possible to the event.
Yeah, ideally, we want to start the investigation as soon as possible after an incident occurs.
Right.
And my understanding was there was a delay with Chevron with that incident. And I think Supervisor Joya, maybe you had worked with Randy Sawyer, the previous director of Hazmat, on that on the investigation with Chevron.
Yeah, I recall that.
Yeah.
Yes, federal.
That's part of the, trying to get to a solution is to really try to understand from county council, what other, when we find this type of a bottleneck where we can't reach agreement on that type of information, what is the next step? Where do we mediate this at so we can get this work done in a faster pace? Does it go to the courts? I don't know, but I'd like to have that within our tool bag to understand, how do we close these type of disagreements in a way where we could get these findings out to people.
I hear you, Supervisor Glover, and I will go back to county council and ask them, what next steps would be if there is not a meeting of the minds in terms of an agreement between the Martinez Refining Company in this case and Scott Berger, who's been hired by the county to do the independent investigation.
Right, and we'll discuss that under item 6. under
Yeah.
item 5, excuse me. Okay. All right, anything else on this item?
Nope.
All right, item 5, receive an update from the oversight. Oh, before we move on, so, Matt, remind me, when the public comment period closes, you incorporate the comments into the final report. When are you anticipating presentation back to us on the wharf oil spill report and to the Richmond City Council?
Nicole's saying late September. I think the question we have, that I would have for the supervisors here is, do we want that presentation to the full board of supervisors, or do you just want it to the ISO committee?
I'm fine with it coming to the ISO committee, given that it was also in West County, and federal. Are you fine with that?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. And if during that report, we think that it needs to be heightened to the
Yeah.
board, make that determination at
At
that
the time, right? And then the other would be to the Richmond City Council, right?
Right.
Understood.
All right, item 5 is receive an update from the Oversight Committee and provide direction as necessary regarding the investigation into spent catalyst release that occurred on November 24th, 25th at the Martinez Refining Company.
All right, thank you Supervisor Joya. So I'm going to start with an update on where we are on the independent investigation. As we were just discussing, we are at the point where we have selected and hired our contractor, but due to not having a signed agreement in place yet, we have not started that contractor investigation. Just to update everyone here on kind of what the steps of this process looks like. Once the contractor is able to go in and perform their root cause analysis investigation, it will follow a very similar path as the Chevron wharf oil spill, where a draft report is presented to the Oversight Committee. Then there is a 45-day public comment period with public meeting, and then a final presentation to Board of Supervisors and City Councils. As everyone may also recall, right now through the Oversight Committee, we are not only pursuing an independent investigation, we also pursued an independent risk assessment, which included a soil evaluation. And so I wanted to quickly summarize the results of that. We did have a meeting on this on June 8th, which was open to the public, and the recording is on our hazmat website under our dedicated MRC page. But through this risk assessment, there were 14 soil samples collected at various locations, both in Contra Costa County and also some in Solano County, that were based on community input and the plume modeling done for us in partnership with the Air District. And a laboratory analysis was conducted for metals found in the spent catalyst sample. Part of the objectives and scope of this were to provide the community with an understanding of any potential risks posed by chronic exposure to the spent catalyst dust, which may have been present in the soil, and also to identify whether the catalyst dust presented a long-term risk to human health in the environment. As everyone may recall, there was a health advisory that was put out that stated until we had these final results, we were advising people who live near the refinery to avoid eating fruits and vegetables. And part of the screening level soil sampling risk assessment was to also identify if there was any risk based off of eating any fruits and vegetables. So the conclusions from this report were that none of the metals analyzed exceeded a regional background range. And what that really means is we did not find levels that exceeded anything that was expected to be found in the soils here in California, and more specifically in our areas in Contra Costa County. We also looked at these metals in terms of screening levels that would be protective to human health. And in a couple of the sampling locations, it was identified that 2 metals in various areas exceeded these screening levels, and that was specifically for arsenic and lead. However, based on the evaluation done by our risk assessment toxicologists and subject matter experts, they found that these exceedances were not likely to be associated with the spent catalyst dust. When looking at the soil samples, the proportions of metals, or basically the amount of metals that were found in that soil, were not matching up to the way the metals are distributed or found in catalyst dust. Based on those findings, the consultant TRC did not recommend any additional sampling or evaluation. And on June 8th, our health officer, Dr. Ori Zabelli, lifted the health advisory stating that people could feel comfortable, consuming the fruits and vegetables that were grown from their gardens. Just a quick kind of, overview of what the next steps are. We're going to have, this draft report was presented to the Oversight Committee on June 8th. We are working on incorporating their comments right now. And we are hoping that in mid to late August, we will be able to start the 45-day public comment period and have a public meeting for this report, where then the members of the public will be able to see the full details of the report and provide their comments, which must be either addressed and or incorporated to that final report. And then that final report will be presented to the Board of Supervisors and City Council. In terms of priorities for us in the MRC Oversight Committee, our utmost priority is getting a contract, or actually I should say our first priority is being able to have Scott Berger to have access to the information needed to be able to conduct their root cause analysis and investigation report. This committee has heard the steps that we've already taken and steps we will take in the future for that. And we also continue to follow up with MRC on not only this incident, but also any other incidents that have occurred that have had any sort of community impact, most notably the July 11th coke dust release that just occurred.
Anything else before we go to some questions? I just wanted to raise a question. Obviously, we heard the discussion about non-disclosure. Where are we on that issue? I think we have put a message out clearly that we don't enter into separate non-disclosure agreements, and we really want this investigation to go forward as quickly as possible. Where are we on that?
So that's correct, Supervisor Joya. The county will not be a party to any agreement. We feel that compromises any of the transparent nature of this investigation, which is what's really at the heart of the industrial safety ordinance. In terms of the confidentiality agreement that would be established between Scott Berger and MRC, my understanding is our county council is making sure that agreement does not bound or bind the contractor that the county has hired in a way that would compromise the transparency of this investigation. So county council is involved. The latest that I have heard as of last evening was that comments have been going back and forth between MRC's council and county council to ensure that agreement does not, again, compromise the transparency of the investigation. And I believe comments were submitted back to MRC yesterday evening by county council on a proposed agreement that would be entered into, again, by Scott Berger and MRC, not the county.
Federal, do you have any comments on this issue further?
Yes, I do. I appreciate that that the councils are meeting to try to get to some agreement in terms of the disclosure. But as I said up in our last agenda item, I really would want us to, not find ourselves continuing to be in a gridlock when it comes to trying to move forward. So I really want us to, as a point of direction, to check with county council and see what's our next mitigating steps to assure that we can get the stuff done in a timely fashion and have some disclosures in terms of what takes place. There's so much going on around this facility over the last number of months, is that, I think that we need to be doing also a safety culture assessment. Something seems as though it's taken place within the facility, whether it's a staffing issue or equipment issue, not sure what it is, but I think that it's time for us to do an independent safety culture assessment. And I would recommend that. I think that something may be taking place, and I would like to understand what's taking place at the facility itself right now.
Yeah, I support that same request. I think whenever there's a pattern of events like what has happened, there's something deeper than, the root cause analysis is clearly going to identify the cause of that November release. but there's been 2 subsequent releases, not as substantial, but the concern is, could there be future releases if this is a pattern that do impact the community further, and there's something deeper going on and looking at safety culture? And as you know, Federal and I dealt with another one like this a number of years ago. There were a number of chemical releases from the former General Chemical plant in Richmond, now Chemtrade, and the county did order a safety culture assessment, which came up with a few dozen recommendations for improving the safety culture. Those recommendations were implemented by the facility, and I think there really hasn't been any major incidents from them since then. It's been an improvement. Matt, tell us how that would work, given I know the ISO does require facility. I mean, there's 2 types of sort of safety culture assessment. The ISO does require facilities to conduct those on a regular basis. Other times after an incident, we have come in and done them. Can you talk about this? You said what's happening there and how we would do sort of an independent effort.
Sure, Supervisor Joya. I'm actually going to turn it over to Nicole. We've had quite a bit of conversation about this over the past week or 2. So I'll let her explain sort of when we do safety culture assessments, when facilities do them, the routine safety culture assessments that are done, how they're presented, and when we may want to, as the county, conduct an independent safety culture assessment. So I'll turn it over to Nicole.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So yes, so both the Industrial Safety Ordinance and California Accidental Release Prevention Program require refineries to conduct a safety culture assessment. The safety culture assessments are done once every 5 years. Refineries are required to do an interim assessment at the 3-year mark. As part of our process through the Industrial Safety Ordinance, all facilities who are subject to the ISO must do a presentation at the Industrial Safety Ordinance CWS ad hoc committee meeting on any new safety culture report that they have. MRC last reported out in May of 2022. That safety culture report that they reported out on was from December 2018. So going on that 5-year basis, their next safety culture assessment would be due December 2023. And with all of the timing requirements, I am assuming, and I believe that it's accurate if I say that MRC, I believe, has already started some of the work to have that survey put out to staff and start collecting the data necessary to be able to conduct that assessment. Additionally, the Industrial Safety Ordinance does afford the county the ability to do their own safety culture assessment after a major chemical accident or release, or MCAR, or based on any audit findings that indicate there is a culture issue or any accident history that might indicate to the county that a further evaluation needs to be done. While in the past, I know we have done independent safety culture assessments, as I have been, looking through kind of what was the last time MRC has done their assessment, when the next assessment is being done. I think, one of the avenues that we can do is looking at this through the oversight committee and having an independent consultant, review that data and make their own independent recommendations based off of the safety culture. That I have seen this done beforehand. I think we took a similar approach in 2012 as well with the Chevron Richmond refinery. And that's kind of the options that we reported under ISO, the status of the safety culture assessment, and also the process we have for putting the safety culture assessment results out to the public.
So what you're suggesting is, explain to me what assessment has been occurring now.
So from my understanding, MRC chooses to do a survey, which is given to their employees and also contractors in order to conduct their safety culture assessments. There's many different methodologies. The ISO allows facilities to choose to do these safety culture assessments, and a written survey is one of them. Because their safety culture assessment timing requires this to be completed December 2023, I do believe that work has already started on distributing that survey and collecting that data. So in terms of us being able to do our own safety culture assessment and knowing that we have been having issues it has been an issue getting agreements put in so that third-party consultants can come in and do the work. My recommendation is that we have a third-party consultant, which is selected by the Oversight Committee, and have this process run through the Oversight Committee to take the data that MRC is already collecting, but do their own independent review and development of recommendations of the safety culture study versus doing an independent full
Right,
entire
right,
safety
right.
culture.
So in other words, we would, the oversight committee this would go to the oversight committee, and there'd be several things. We would hire through the oversight committee an independent entity to take the data that is being collected and to use that data. Because I know one of the things I know you've talked, well, I'll ask this question after, but you'll take the data that is being collected, do our own independent review of that data, and then make our own independent set of recommendations from that data. Which the only other thing I would add to that is that if the independent consultant believed that we need to collect further data, that be part of it as well, I assume, correct?
That is correct. I would want the proposal and scope of work to be outlined such that if the data that the independent consultant was reviewing indicated that there needed to be a future study, whether that be a survey, interviews, or focus group study, they would be able to conduct such a study to be able to help them develop the recommendations around the safety culture of this
Got it.
facility.
So you'll take the data that is being collected, you'll look at whether you need additional data. We'll make our own series of recommendations based on that.
Correct.
And I know there's one thing that I know has come up before in our discussions is that we have to be conscious about not over surveying the same set of employees, because then it affects the sort of response and validity and all of that.
That is correct.
Okay.
And I think that that's a process that bodes well. You know, we already have an oversight committee that's in place, and you know, the hiring of a consultant, I think, makes all the sense in the world so that we can do that have that independent view of what's taking place as we go through the data and the survey information.
Okay. All right, shall we go to public comment? Should we go to public comment?
Yeah.
Oh, one other thing I wanted to clarify from Supervisor Glover and myself. There's been issues raised about whether there needs to be any change in the community warning system, notification protocols, or anything coming out of MRC's failure to notify. Let me say this. There is a DA investigation, a criminal investigation that is ongoing. And based on my experience, that is the most complete, thorough investigation that can be obtained into the cause of MRC's failure to notify in the November 2022 incident. That any additional civil investigation would not yield anything more. In fact, could potentially interfere with the DA's ability to collect information. I know this also happens when the Air District conducts its own criminal investigations, or it can lead to criminal penalties, or even civil. There is, you know, I think having that type of investigation is important to see that through and support that. I think once the DA's investigation is done, and if they, for example, established evidence of that would lead to some kind of fines and penalties or other action, that investigation is publicly filed with the court. And that and the details of that investigation are available in public. And then that would get presented to the oversight committee and to us. And then at that time, we would fully understand the circumstances that led, or facts that led to the failure to notify. And then we can determine at that time whether there needs to be any other changes in the notification or anything. Because I know there's been interest expressed from the community about, being protected from a failure to notify. And we have had discussion. I'm chairing a subcommittee of the Air District that is looking at, how to increase incident, monitoring after an event. And one of the questions we asked, and I think is relevant here, and we asked this of sort of technical experts at the Air District, is there technology available today that would allow us to determine if a general release was happening through measurements and instrumentation to cover in the event a facility didn't notify us? And the answer from sort of the expert staff were that technology does not exist today, that there's efforts to develop it. But if you think of a refinery, right, there's many sources. Many sources of releases. It could be a fugitive, emissions release from a valve, a pipe. It could be a release out of a stack. It could be a fire, and that there is no reliable technology that allows us to measure whether any, all of those, any potential source could cross a fence line and how it impacts the community. So that was the answer that we received. I think that was relevant. Federal, I just wanted you to know about that came because, my first reaction is there technology and instrumentation that could let us know? I mean, we know when flaring happens, even if we're not notified, because there are measurements on the flare stacks. It is different from general releases that come out of a facility. So I think we will look at the report from the district attorney, and at that time, we would understand if any other actions need to be taken. The next agenda item does talk about sort of status report on our sort of discussion on using the community warning system for some additional notification. So that's the next item. So I just wanted to note that point.
And I appreciate that, John, because I think it's important that we do that. And I think that you're certainly the right person at their district to be chairing that committee and enter into the dialogue because of exposure and experience. So
great. All right, we will now go to public comment. And why don't we first start with people in Martinez? Matt, at the board, we like to start with people who've made their effort to come to the chambers, ask there, and then we'll go to the remote.
Sounds good, John. If there was anyone in person here at Martinez that would like to make a public comment, please raise your hand. Okay, we have one public commenter. You have 2 minutes.
Well, they have to have 3 because that's what the agenda says.
Oh, 3. Yep, you're right. Thanks, Supervisor.
All right. Well, good morning, Supervisor Joya, Supervisor Glover, Director Kaufman, Director Heath, Brandon Matson with the Martinez Refining Company. Also have my colleague Justin with me. I think we'll do a combined comment, but I wanted to just give an update on the NDA from our perspective that was brought up earlier. I want you to know that we're absolutely committed to being transparent in the process. Our council is working with county council. It is correct that we did get comments back last night. At this point, though, it's really been phone and email communication. So we've offered up just a face-to-face meeting between the councils if we could just all get in a room and try to finalize and get this across the finish line. But I also like to point out that as far as all the data and information that would ultimately be submitted, we've already collected all of that. So as soon as we can get this, hopefully agreement across the finish line, and that information go immediately over to the county without any further delay there. And then I just want to make sure it's clear that all we are asking for is that the third-party consultant be held to the same provisions that apply to the law. So we're not asking for anything beyond that. It's just getting that assurance that confidential business information will be appropriately protected as it is currently in the industrial safety ordinance. And with that, I'll just turn it to Justin if there's anything further you'd want to cover on that or any other topic.
No, I think Brandon covered everything on the NDA standpoint. I did want to just kind of confirm the timeline for the safety culture survey. So we have been working through the data collection part of our safety culture survey. So that does match up with what y'all spoke to earlier based on the timelines. We actually normally don't do this, but because we did have a major maintenance activity that we call turnaround in the spring this year, we actually extended our safety culture survey across our major contract workforce. As y'all know, a lot of contractors come on site for those major maintenance events. So for this safety culture survey, we wanted to capture more information. So we actually opened it up for that period. So we actually extended it all the way past through really March this year. So our team has been working to go through all that data, capture it, collect it. And we're actually in the process right now of working through what is our plan to address the learnings from the safety culture assessment. So we're not complete with that process yet, but we're very close. We're hoping to have that done within the next month or so and have that complete. And so I did want to just make sure that everyone knows, because I know some in the room know this, but for the public members, that this process is not just a process from the company standpoint. The safety culture assessment is conducted in conjunction with the USW, the union on site, and our joint health and safety committee, which is basically 50% USW members and 50% staff members at the refinery. And they play a key and vital role in doing that safety culture assessment. So I just wanted to make sure the public understood that. So that's really the end of my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. And just Federal, go ahead.
So I really want to appreciate you both being here and being present for this meeting. And so you're saying that assessment should be wrapped up in the next, how long, Justin?
We're hoping to have that safety assessment, including the final corrective actions with the included schedule and timelines for that, wrapped up within the next month or two.
Yeah, let me be clear. We're not looking for your corrective actions. We're just looking for the data that we could independently review and then determine if we need more data and make our own sort of conclusion on corrective actions.
Right.
Yes, I understand that fully. I was just given the timeline of our culture assessment so that everyone is aware. So the data collection piece is complete, and we have all that information. Obviously we like to work together with the county in this and even with the third party. So, we would hope that our corrective actions would be taken into account, at least a part of the process, to make sure that lines up with whatever the county or the third party would come out to, as we would have our own corrective actions that were developed in jointly with the USW at the site. So.
Thank you.
Is there any other public comment in Martinez? There are no additional comments in person. We'll now go to Zoom. If you're on Zoom and would like to make a public comment on item number 5, please raise your hand. If you're on the phone, please press *9. Our first commenter will be Shoshana.
Yeah, good morning. I want to thank you all for a really illuminating and robust conversation. And would like to circle back briefly to this whole issue of the non-disclosure agreement, the lack of which is kind of holding up a timely undertaking of the root cause analysis. I'm really curious as to what body of state law governs the definition of so-called trade secrets and the definition of what is proprietary. Because, it seems that the ball is kind of solely in the industry's court in this area, and that this is handicapping the investigative and regulatory process. So I'm wondering if somebody can address this.
Yeah, and Shoshana, we'll answer the questions at the end because there may be some overlapping questions.
Great, thank you.
The next commenter will be Heidi Taylor.
Hi again. I want to address this idea of inherently safer systems. Like Brandon and Justin, when do you install a wet gas scrubber that will reduce emissions and keep us safer? When will you install air monitoring that measures PM 2.5? I've heard the comments that the technology is not available, but I find that unacceptable because what you do is you transfer the risk onto community members, and that is unacceptable. Restaurants and others don't get to say, oh, sorry, the technology doesn't exist to, detect harmful bacteria while we're cooking or something. It doesn't work like that. You all have chosen to do business in a very risky industry, and you are responsible for keeping everyone safe if you're going to run that business. Okay, secondly, I want to talk about to the supervisors, is there any way that, so I come from the perspective of being a divorce lawyer, and when custody orders are not written specifically, you have problems. And so a lot of times is through experience, you learn, oh, shoot, we should say, well, if you don't do this, then this is going to happen. So I would like to suggest that we be a little more proactive and amend the ISO so that if an NDA is not forthcoming within a certain amount of time, then there are consequences for that. That should not, again, be a risk that is pushed off onto the community while we have to wait for reports that we so desperately need. Second comment is, it sounds like there is a provision in the ISO that would trigger an audit or a safety culture report. And I'm wondering why that wasn't triggered sooner in this particular case, like right after the Thanksgiving incident. I don't see why that wasn't triggered immediately. Also on the Contra Costa Health website, the ISO, there's an annual performance review. It's dated March 2022. I would like to respectfully ask that that be updated so that because I know that there's been a lot going on and I know you all are busy and I appreciate all of your efforts, but that is one way that the public can keep track of what's going on with the ISO. Thank you.
And again, we'll respond to these questions at the end. Yeah.
The next commenter will be Charles Davidson.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak and other people as well. I would like to state that perhaps something positive could be obtained from the Thanksgiving Day 2022 spent catalyst release of 20 to 24 tons. In perspective, Thanksgiving Day, since Thanksgiving Day, there have been over 200 tons of PM 2.5 particulate matter released according to the research from the Air District based upon the 2018 data, which is MRC's FCC benchmark. That is 200 tons just since Thanksgiving of PM 2.5. The discussion of the incident has taken so long has been so obscure and confusing for residents that one journalist reported on the incident stated in an unfortunately highly inaccurate manner that the most recent Saturday incident showed no evidence that any of the coke dust, which is chemically similar to charcoal, according to health experts, and poses relatively low risk to human health, traveled off the refinery grounds. I think that needs to be clarified and corrected publicly by the health department, according to the statements, in fact, by the health director and also by BACMUD staff. The FCC PM 2.5 is not similar to coal dust. Petroleum coke is heavily loaded with vanadium, which is a corrosive material used in the production of certain batteries. Vanadium is a principal metal in refineries, which causes pulmonary fibrosis, according to numerous research papers in the National Library of Medicine, which I have read, and that includes asthma and chronic bronchitis. Further, PM 2.5 and smaller ultrafine PM, less than 1 micron, can cross the blood-brain barrier and should be considered as structured nanoparticles. Moreover, an extremely valuable value-added product called slurry oil is used to produce needle coke. Slurry oil is explicitly used to produce battery-grade petroleum coke and is increasingly valued because of the exponential growth of electrical vehicles. MRC, therefore, has more than enough money to pay for a wet gas scrubber simply because of the added value of slurry oil for battery-grade coke, if for no other reason. So I'm glad to have the opportunity to state publicly and remind people of the report. from BACMA's Rule 65 report that MRC emits 300 tons per year of vanadium-loaded PM2.5 battery-grade petroleum coke particles produced thereof. The wet gas scrubber installation is a no-brainer, and MRC should drop its lawsuit and stop stating that they will close the refinery and sacrifice jobs. Thank you very much, and please get a wet gas scrubber.
Our next speaker will be Maureen.
Me again. I want to address in the conclusion section of this MRC oversight. It says that none of the metals analyzed exceeded regional background range. Now that's my term, regional background range. My question is, where do those numbers come from? Is that Cal EPA? Is that County Hazmat? Is this public information that I can access? It would be very helpful, honestly, because we're going through a situation in Crockett and Rodeo right now where there's this glittery sheen on cars. It's coating cars. And I would like to, and we've done, the community has done testing on this already for heavy metals, et cetera. But I would just love to know what the regional background range is for what we're looking at. I've heard that term bantered about with hazmat recently. So that's important to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker will be call-in user 1.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I find it ridiculous that a lot of the public speakers are trying to pretend that they're experts. I praise God that a lot of people must, want to stay in their marriage. We even have a divorce lawyer today trying to tell the refinery, Chevron, everyone what to do. Wow, hallelujah. So according to the report, I have full confidence that Chevron is transparent and that the evaluation based on science is reliable. Anyone who has any issues should go ahead, because there are lawyers here, go ahead and challenge. Otherwise, it is wrong for you to come here as a pretend public speaker, real activist, getting money somewhere else, quote unquote, maybe from communist China, to come here and bash a very essential American industry that is pertinent to my everyday life. You guys need to be honest. If you're an activist, please do not raise your hand here. Raising hand here is reserved for people like me. If you're a lawyer, you have any issues, go ahead and do your thing. Don't come here and pretend as a public speaker. That is a waste of my tax dollars. Also, I just want to say that a lot of the communist Chinese party and their family opened Chinese restaurants that use oil. There are a lot of oil cooking from communist China that also need to have their oil evaluated. I'm getting sick. I get more sick going to communist Chinese opened restaurants than breathing air here. So please stop being a hypocrite, okay? As a government, if you want to make sure our health is taken care of, make sure you sample those oil used by those communist Chinese that are serving mostly Latinos and Blacks. Thank you.
So I will say, for this resident from San Ramon who often calls in at every agenda item at the Air District and our board meeting, I appreciate the comments of residents in Martinez and in areas near refineries. They have every right to be able to comment about an impact of a facility on their community. And everyone is an expert in terms of the impact of a facility on their lungs and in their community. And gee, I didn't realize when I go to a Chinese restaurant, I never knew the difference between one that is operated by someone from Taiwan or someone from mainland China. I just go for the food, but I did not realize what could tell the difference between those. Anyway, Other comments?
Our next speaker will be Craig.
Hi, thank you. I missed the beginning of the conversation or the presentation, but I just wanted to emphasize something I've conveyed to all of you previously, that this independent investigation, the work of the Oversight Committee, really needs to look at the failure of the community warning system from the spent catalyst Thanksgiving release. And again, with the issues that came up with the recent Coke releases, we again see that there are shortcomings, problems in collaboration, communication with the warning system that haven't been sufficiently addressed. And this was the major failure from the spent catalyst incident in my mind. I know a lot of folks don't agree with that. They think the major issue should have been the soil and the fruits and vegetables and such, which, I think that if we had spent as much time over the last 6 months focusing on the warning system problems as we did on soil, probably we wouldn't have had some of the shortcomings and failures from the Coke incidents, which thankfully were minor incidents. So again, I understand the arguments you've made for why you can't look at the warning system issue. But you've heard me, and I don't accept those as being legitimate. Previous comment on the Coke release incident that may have referred to something I wrote. If new information has come out that the latest Coke incident release got off the refinery grounds, I'd like to know that. I didn't see that in the reports, in the social media reports from Saturday night, that anything got beyond the refinery grounds. As far as Coke dust and the health impacts, Mr. Kaufman said at the city council meeting last week, it was like charcoal dust. I believe in holding MRC accountable. I believe in pushing MRC to reduce emissions, but I don't think we need to do that by stoking panic in our community over every release and blowing every release up into something more significant than it is, because then we create a Chicken Little situation, so that when something significant or bad really does happen, some people in the community won't be inclined to believe it because some of these other incidents have been blown out of proportion. The EPA data on Coke dust shows that in limited quantities, it doesn't pose a significant health risk. Obviously, fugitive dust,
30
Coke
seconds.
handling facilities, that's a different situation, but we don't need to use our residents as pawns and panic them and alarm them over every incident to hold MRC accountable. And some people are, unfortunately, are trying to do that, and it's not responsible and it's not right. Thank you.
And Craig, if you're listening, I did at the beginning address, I think, that issue of the community warning system. And what I said was that we'll be looking at that issue after we get a final investigation report from the DA's office. Because in order to really understand any issues about the community warning system, we need to get to the bottom of the facts and circumstances that led to the failure to disclose. And so I think when the DA's report is done, I think, and it's, and if there's a filing of that report with the court with any charges, that the Oversight Committee, and frankly also this committee, because we've been involved with changes to the community warning system and are pretty familiar with it, that the Oversight Committee and this committee will see the circumstances that led to the failure to notify and be in a much better position to understand any potential, changes on anything related to the community warning system. So I want to be clear, the fact that it's not being looked at now is because of the need to collect data from this criminal investigation. So I just wanted to note that. And I think, by the way, your point of every release is different, and you're right. Some releases have an impact on the community, some don't. And so I think what we're concerned about is, even if a release doesn't have an impact on the community, that particular release, if there's a pattern of releases, we want to understand what's causing that pattern of releases to avoid a future one, which could end up being bigger and impact the community. But your point is correct.
Yeah, I would just add that, there's a number of data points that we need to look at, because we don't want to put people in panic mode over small releases. So before we set policy, we definitely want to be able to review all that information and to be able to make good policy decisions
Right.
for it.
Okay. All right, other public comments?
Next commenter will be Penny.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Okay, I'm kind of piggybacking off of Craig's information as far as the community warning system. I understand you want to wait until the investigation is complete, but given we've had 3 things this month already, and there was acknowledgement that MRC contacted someone at the health department, but the health department never found the voicemail. So obviously there is a serious breakdown if MRC does not have a hotline to be able to call in and get a human immediately. I don't know if it needs to roll to some kind of system, phone system within county health department to make sure more than one person gets it in the case of a notification of any sort, whether it's emergency or not. But that was a serious issue that I saw that said that the health department was still looking for the voicemail. So that to me means the health department has some homework to do there to make sure whatever system they plan on using, it works for any release, not just MRC, but if anyone needs to notify a hazmat type issue. So that's my concern there.
Thank you. And then to note that the last release last weekend, the 2 issues we heard is 1, there was not an offsite impact from that release, and 2, there was pretty immediate notification through the community warning system by the facility that those are 2 pieces of information we've received from the health department.
Supervisor Joya, do you mind if I respond to that last comment?
Sure.
I just want everyone to know that the county's notification policy states that if a facility has the community warning system access, that is the primary mode of notifying the county of a release. For the July 11th release of petroleum dust, that was not activated until 10:21 a.m. According to MRC, they did attempt to contact the county health department at 9:52 a.m. by phone, which is not the preferred method, but the phone number that was called, we're still trying to determine. We do have a 24-hour emergency phone number, 925-655-3232, and that's answered by county staff at the health department, roughly Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, our business hours. If a call comes in after business hours or on the weekends, it rolls over to the county sheriff's department, to their 24-hour dispatch that answers that call and gets in touch with our county health department by paging us and contacting us after hours. So we already have systems in place, and leaving voicemails is not a method of communication that we would ever advise for reporting a release.
Thank you.
The next speaker will be Kathy.
Good morning. We've covered so much ground. I hope we're still in the Thanksgiving Day item. Supervisor Joya, I would like to thank you for stating that we will make our own assessment. The county will make its own assessment of the Thanksgiving Day catalyst release. And this will not just be a response to the MRC report. Another thing, I would like to just add that the soil assessment has kind of taken the public's imagination by storm in a very important way. That Martinez is an area where people do have their gardens and their private small orchards. That's the culture of Martinez. So that I think was actually helpful. But at this point, the soil assessment cannot be just the main focus. And I hope that the risk assessment that's coming will look beyond just the assessment in the soil. simply because the only way to explain that I can think of, not being a pro in that subject, is that maybe the rain washed away all the catalyst and that there's not much left and it went somewhere, but it's just not where the plume took it. That's the only way to say that if the catalyst dust is not what was found, if only background metals were found, whatever that is. So soil is not the end all of this risk assessment, I hope. And again, thank you, Supervisor Joya, for your staunchness in transparency and independence.
Can I be clear? It's something that Supervisor Glover said as well.
Yes, certainly.
Right.
Thank you,
Right. Thank you.
Supervisor Glover.
Supervisors, we have no additional hands that are raised that have not spoken already.
Okay, so let me try to go through, get staff to respond to some of the good questions that have come up. One was that the comment that none of the metals exceeded was it regional background range? What does that mean? Where do the numbers come from? How does somebody look at those?
Yes, so those numbers came from both Department of Toxic Substances Control and US EPA published reports that were used by our consultant TRC. I do believe that when we have that draft report out for public comment, that the full details of where those studies are can be found, but we can also certainly work to provide that information to the public with the meeting minutes.
Okay, and we can put those in the minutes. What is the body of state law with regard to definition of proprietary and trade secrets?
Yeah, so the trade secret, is governed by California Health and Safety Code. And in the California Health and Safety Code, definition of trade secret is meant to have the same meaning as Subdivision F, Section 7924.51 of the Government Code. And again, we'll put this in the meeting minutes, and Section 1061 of the Evidence Code. So this is something that is defined by those two codes.
So a question that comes up, and I have asked this question before, and I know Supervisor Glover has. Who determines, so under the industrial safety ordinance, we are not, right? We understand the obligations under state law about not disclosing certain information. What happens when there is a dispute between the county health department and the facility over the application of that definition to some specific information that's been received from the facility? It does seem that having a decision-making, having a resolution process to that difference is important. How is that done now?
Yeah, so Matt can correct me if I'm wrong, but from my experience, this has come up one time for us where there has been a dispute over, and it was not, the term trade secret information was not used, it was confidential business information that was used by a facility to request revisions of an audit report that was developed by our group. We were able to handle this through internal discussions back and forth with the facility. Contra Costa Health believed that the facility was overextending the definition of confidential business information. And so we were able to have discussions with the facility, and we're able to come to agreement that the information we put in there that did not fall within that trade secret information would still be available in the report. And yes, it was a lengthy process. It's not something that we have written out and developed, such as like a dispute resolution.
So there's no written formal dispute resolution process identified in the ISO today, is there?
There is a dispute resolution process through the California Accidental Release Prevention Program. From my understanding, we did not use that the last time this issue came up.
What is that dispute resolution process?
I would have to get back to you on that. I do not recall details.
Federal, what do you think about getting this issue to come back to us at a meeting so we can maybe further discuss what a dispute resolution process would look like and whether this process in CalArt makes sense to incorporate into the ISO or something else? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I am very much in favor of that. And as I had said earlier, I think what's important is for us to really understand what the steps are that we could take, because this becomes very timely and it's of no benefit to the referee, to this committee or the general public. So we need to try to by the process.
Right. I think we need to figure out a dispute resolution process that is as quick as possible, because whenever something like this happens, it holds up an investigation. And the longer an investigation is delayed, the further away from the incident we get and the harder it becomes to get accurate information. So sounds like what you're hearing from both of us, Nicole and Matt, is for you to explore looking at CalARC or other, maybe working with county council to come back to us at our next meeting with some options to include a dispute resolution process.
Understood.
And second, and I think this was a comment Heidi Taylor made that I think you should come back to us with as well. Because right now we're at the mercy of the facility, and if a facility engages in long negotiations over an NDA or all of this, then there need to be consequences. Because again, it's delaying the investigation, which is what happened with the oil spill, Chevron oil spill, and what potentially could happen here with MRC. So I think it would be good to also, when you come back to us on the dispute resolution process, what are the consequences if the facility is not forthcoming on this?
Okay.
I mean, we're learning as we go along to improve the ordinance, and I think these are two key issues. Now, we've seen this enough, right, Federal?
Yes, we have. And
Yeah.
It's all about continuous change, and as these
Right.
things, that we need to make those appropriate changes.
And I get that lawyers for a facility often have a different interpretation than lawyers for a regulating agency like us or the air district, and we need a formal dispute resolution process. And we need consequences when we don't have an agreement on that.
Yeah.
So that'll come back. There was a comment made about why didn't the November event trigger a safety culture assessment? And my understanding is that event under the ordinance did not trigger one. And so maybe the staff, in fact, my understanding is technically even the recent 2 incidents don't trigger one. We're asking for it, but can you explain what triggers under the ordinance triggers a safety culture assessment?
You want to?
Yeah, so under the industrial safety ordinance, a safety culture assessment can be triggered by a couple of things. First is a major chemical accident or release, or MCAR. The second could be any audit findings that are found through the triennial audits that are conducted from our division. And also if there is a pattern of accident history that the department then feels a safety culture assessment would be necessary.
So I think supervisors, one of the things that, when the November incident took place, obviously you all directed us to conduct an independent investigation of that. I think we were waiting to see what that independent investigation showed us before we initiated a safety culture assessment. One of the things that's happened over the course of the last few weeks has been the apparent late notification again to the county for a release from the Martinez Refining Company. And so that has spurred our conversations surrounding safety culture assessment and initiating that process now.
Got it. And the safety culture assessment can address the failure to notify issues as well, can't it?
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, because if there's not proper training or there's some culture issue going on, that will address it. Right. And I want to say, and we get to the next item on community warning system, we always look for continual change. We always want to learn from an incident and determine if there needs to be any changes in a system. I guess we call that continuous improvement. There was several comments raised by a few speakers regarding measurements and so forth. let me be clear, the air district has, and I know facilities have some monitoring, and the air district passed a rule a few years ago, Rule 12, I think it's 1215. I get caught up, forget all the numbers, but it's a rule that sets up a fee schedule for facilities to pay for the air district to be involved with more monitoring, fence line monitoring around facilities. It's taken longer than we all want to see to implement that rule. And that is moving forward to put in even more monitoring. And then we have this separate committee, as I say, that's looking at mobile, monitoring after an incident. So I think the air district is moving down that road for additional monitoring. There is some measurements and monitoring by facilities as well, but we know, that, and those are often approved by the air district, so it's not put in sort of without that oversight. I think the point I was making, and I've been doing this for 25 years, and federal, I've been on the air district for, 20 years. Federal and I have been on our board 23 and 25 years respectively, and we've been dealing with this. When I said there is not technology to determine when a release affects a community, we are talking about the whole universe of releases. There are some types of releases where there is, and other types where there isn't. Because also sometimes a release goes straight up in the air depending on the weather. And then later, when wind patterns change, come down and affect an area a couple miles away. So having measurements on the fence line don't pick that up. Because it's not like all emissions cross the fence line at ground level. They may go up, come down somewhere else. You would need monitors on every block. And you would also need to distinguish, this happens all the time, what the source of that particular emission, like PM 2.5 could also come from the roadway and diesel trucks and things like that, not just from a refinery. And the current executive director of the air district, who was commenting on this, was a previous deputy director at the South Coast Air District and dealt with this issue, and before coming to our air district was appointed by President Biden to head a number of divisions at US EPA. He is really well informed. So as much as we may want or believe that there is technology to measure what crosses a fence line today, there isn't accurate technology. We're all hoping it gets developed. But saying that, there is technology and the air district's looking to implement that will measure impacts in communities. And I think, and we will see those being implemented here over the next few years. And I think we've advocated for that also information to be available, transparent, in real time, with understanding what those numbers mean. So I think I want to distinguish between those two. I think we can have really good measurements in communities. We just don't have the technology to measure an impact from a facility at that time immediately, which does get back to the issue that we are relying on facilities to notify the community warning system. And this is why we take seriously when that facility fails or delays its notification, and why we need to continue to make, to hold them accountable with fines and penalties, and to get to the Craig Lazzaretti point, which is what else can we do to reduce the risk of that happening? And this is not, as we have found, this is not an easy issue. There's a lot of, it's very complicated. So I just wanted to note that, as we try to, but I think these are all really good questions. I think that was, and the last point, I do think Craig made a really good point, is we have to be aware there are different types of releases, like the last release of Coke Dust last Saturday didn't impact the community. It was on site. So, but because there was a pattern, it was the third, the second one in 2 weeks and the third, given the major one in November, we are concerned about what that means at the facility. And is it an indicator of future releases that could have an impact on the community? And that's why the safety culture assessment that Supervisor Glover talked about is really important. Federal comments, and then the staff closing, and then we'll move to the next item.
Not really, John. I just want to thank the public because I think it's important for them to be able to air their issues and concern, and for us to try to address them as appropriate. And also I want to thank the refinery managers for being present today and sharing. This is all about community and how we are going to make sure that the accountability is in place. So thank you all for showing up today.
Thank you. And I want to just echo that. I think the community has been, its own strong advocate, and all your questions are good ones. And that we really, we understand there's a ways to go on this. And, I've lived through many of these, being a resident of Richmond, and the Richmond community is well experienced in these types of issues, as is, I know, in Supervisor Glover's district, the Rodeo community. So, this is, we take this seriously, and it gets to the issue of people's safety, feeling of safety, their health, trust, both in the county and in a facility. And it's right. And I think we've always tried to operate from the basis that we are there to protect public health, and we will always stand up for that and hold facilities accountable, and at the same time want to work with facilities to improve their operations, knowing that they know that this is not good for their reputation or their bottom line to the extent they have to pay fines and penalties or make changes. So we want to hold, it is about continuous improvement for both us and facilities.
Yeah, just to add one more thing, because I worked 23 years in the petrochemical company before.
Yeah, you were at Dow Chemical, right?
And my motto was at that time that people should go home the way that they came. And that means that if there's the safety culture within the refinery or petrochemical company, whatever that might be, is in place, that our community at large is safe.
Right. And we appreciate, I just want to add, the workers at these facilities and the union that represents the workers who care about the safety of their employees. And I think getting their input and feedback on safety culture has been shown to be very important to improving the safety of a facility. Okay.
Supervisors, if I could just summarize, then it sounds like you're directing staff to work with the oversight committee to initiate the safety culture assessment provision that's allowed underneath the industrial safety ordinance as a result of a major chemical accident or release. So we will begin to work with the oversight committee to establish that process and get that going. The second is you would like a dispute resolution explored with county council on when an agreement cannot come between the county and a facility surrounding trade secret or confidential business information.
And what consequences if a facility fails to, agree at the outset, right? Because it delays this. There's two issues, right? The preventative issue of getting the facility to go forward with the investigation without dragging out the whole discussion of that. And what are the consequences if we don't start the investigation within a period of time? And second, what's the dispute resolution process when something does come up during the investigation?
Understood.
Yeah, we definitely don't want to dilute the risk surrounding these issues by dragging this out over long periods of time.
All right, thank you, everybody. This was, I thought, a very detailed and productive discussion. So item 6, receive a status report regarding a proposed modifications to the county's hazardous materials incident notification policy for level 1 incident notifications to the public and provide direction as necessary.
All right, yes, okay, thank you very much. So I will try and be brief so that we can allow time for public comment on this item, but I wanted to give an update on our community warning system and hazardous materials notifications update. So over the last few years, we have had quite a few changes that have been incorporated into our incident notification policy that affect the CWS levels for hazardous materials incidents and what is to be reported. So some of the changes that we have that went into effect on March 14th, 2022 is before that time, we had 4 different CWS levels, a level 0, 1, 2, and 3. The change that went into effect in 2022 removed that level 0, meaning that notifications were no longer required for major unit startups and shutdowns not associated with the release of a hazardous materials. We also added descriptive language for each level to make it easier to understand the actions that are or are not necessary for different levels of CWS notification.
Before you move on, just to explain, 'cause we did require more notifications of things to the city or that were not required to be notified before. Which category was that in?
So that'll be the last part that I talk about when we're talking about the flaring.
Okay, all right, go ahead. Okay, go ahead. Right.
No worries. So we have descriptive language. So a level 1 is really a notification only. Level 2 means that there is a public health
I
advice.
think you need to explain just for the public what does a level 1 mean? What does a level 2 mean?
So for level 1, when we say notification only, this is a release that is expected to either not go offsite, or if it does go offsite, to not have health consequences for persons in the areas that are affected. And it is really truly a notification to us, the Hazardous Materials Division, that there has been a threatened or actual release of a hazardous material, so that we are aware of the incident and are able to monitor the situation in case conditions change. For a level 2 CWS event, this is an event that has a release of a hazardous material that has gone off-site and is expected to have some sort of serious health impacts to those sensitive persons, whether that be, people with chronic illness, someone who is very young or older in age. And traditionally with that, that's why we call this the public health advisory. This is when our health officer would issue a health advisory around this incident to instruct those who have sensitivities on what those potential health effects may be and any actions they need to take. And then a level 3 community warning system incident is something that has gone off-site and will have serious health impacts for all of those who are in the affected areas. We call this our public protective actions required, but people more commonly know this as when our shelter in place is issued. Most traditionally for a level 3, we will issue a shelter in place or evacuation, but that is when you will hear the activation of those community warning system sirens if you live in an area near there. This is also the time when we use every single tool in our toolbox. So you will be getting notified via text messages, emails. We will have information on our social media sites. We will use emergency ring down systems if necessary. We will also be putting things out on, our website, through the media. When something like this happens, it is communicated throughout all of our levels. And I will talk a little bit now later in this presentation about some improvements we've made to messaging around different levels. I'd also like to note that if there is a level 2 or level 3 community warning system level incident reported, that is automatically by definition considered a major chemical accident or release, or MCAR, which will then trigger a lot of different requirements under the Industrial Safety Ordinance. Another change that we made in March that we had put into place was a time frame for notification. The notification policy beforehand had stated that notification was immediately required, but you did not put a time frame around that. around that, based on lessons learned from the Chevron 2021 wharf oil spill and other incidents that have occurred. This incident notification policy now requires you to notify within 15 minutes from discovery if the origin is known, or within 20 minutes of discovery if investigating a release with an unknown origin. The changes in 2022 also put a lot more transparency around flaring that occurs from our facilities. All flaring is required to be reported. The incident notification policy does come with a specific definition for what flaring is. And when there is flaring or an incident that lasts longer than 20 minutes, or an incident that lasts longer than 20 minutes that is seen or heard, or an incident associated with odors, we now made those incidents more transparent by automatically putting that information onto our website so that people know that we have been alerted to an incident that may be seen, heard, or smelled by the community lasting longer than 20 minutes. And those activations will stay on our website until that release has concluded. So there was a lot of changes that went into effect in 2022. As Supervisor Joy has said, we are always looking at continuous improvement and ways that the community warning system and our incident notification policy can be better, and for our community warning system to better serve our communities. So in May of this year, we did do some changes around level 2s. As I stated, a level 2 notification is
And
where.
before you move to level 2, explain what notification only means.
So notification only right now, as defined by the incident notification policy, is a notification that comes into us, the Hazardous Materials Division. There are no offsite health consequences expected, and a level 1 incident is usually expected to remain on site at the facility. As the incident notification policy stands today, there is no communication via text messages or other avenues out to the public for a level 1. However, if a level 1 lasts longer than 20 minutes or has odors, this will automatically post to our website.
And just to note, what folks have asked, why aren't you letting us know about an on-site that doesn't have off-site consequences? I think it gets to the issue of crying fire all the time, because we want the public to be aware or to act when there are off-site consequences, and that letting everybody, that while we have information, if it's more than 20 minutes, because I think what came out of is people may say, gee, I smell something, or I can see a flare, for example, and we would post that to the website. We need to let people know about that. But if there's no off-site impacts, we don't want to let people know because then it discourages it sort of people become immune from taking an action when they really need to take it.
Right, so the messaging that's put up there is to alert the public that there is something going on and that the Hazardous Materials Division Incident Response Team is aware of that. As you mentioned, a lot of people, do commonly have questions like, I'm smelling an odor, I see some flaring, they want to know what's occurring. This is a way of reassuring the public that we have been notified of that and that we are monitoring the situation. By having these different levels available, and with the different triggers in terms of messaging and notification, our desire was that the public would know that if anything in that situation changes, then we would be able to provide additional messaging should any actions need to occur.
Okay.
For a level 2, again, a public health advisory where there is offsite health consequences expected that may impact the health of sensitive populations, we have implemented a change as of May 9th of this year, 2023. That change now includes text messaging notifications and emails. In specific incident events at the discretion of Contra Costa Health, there may be phone notifications also made. And in further slides in this, we're going to talk a little bit more about what it means when we say there's text messaging, how that gets implemented and who's going to be notified. And then again, for our level 3, where we have a public protective action required, this is where there will be offsite health consequences impacting the health of the general public. The CWS sirens will go off. You will have phone notifications, emails, posting on our website, the CWS website. Again, every single tool and available media outlets that we have to be able to communicate this message out to the public will be used in the event of a level 3. So to address the level 2 community warning system messaging changes that occurred in May, What now happens beforehand for a CWS level 2 activation, a health advisory would be put out and we would be able to put that out through media and posting on our website. Now, upon initial facility CWS level 2 activation, and I do want to remind everyone in the public that the facilities with community warning system terminals are the ones who will first be activating and putting this notification through to us. It is not county health who is putting in that notification. The following steps are going to happen. For registered users, anyone who lives in what we call a community warning system zone 0, which is within 1,000 feet of that facility, will automatically have a text message initiated. Any users with addresses in their community warning system account, because the community warning system will allow you to have multiple addresses that lie within 1,000 feet of the facility, will be notified. Users that have selected all notifications from the facility activating CWS will also be notified. As Contra Costa Health responds to these level 2 incidents in determining what the offsite impacts are, we do have the ability to activate additional zones for notification based on what we are seeing out in the field and what our incident response team is able to share back with us. So to kind of address these zones that we're talking about, the zones that we are first initially working with are something that are called 10 zones or telephone emergency network zones. But I do want to point out that all incidents are different. And based on the information that we have on an incident, after those initial zone 0 notifications are made, if we found that there was another area that needed to be notified, we do have a geographical a geolocation way to be able to pinpoint a certain area. So it is not just limited to these 10 zones that you see on site. So that is a recent improvement that we've made. One of the first uses we had for this was in Martinez when there was a mercury spill at the Amtrak incident. We were able to use the text messaging and email system to be able to alert residents in Martinez of this incident and areas to avoid in downtown Martinez.
Nicole, can you speak a little bit to how we are getting the information for those phone numbers and how we're identifying people with language barriers also?
Yeah, so I can speak to how we're notifying people or getting that information. That information comes from all registered users of the community warning system. I think we can also put in the chat if people who are online today do not know or are not registered for that system, we can put how they can register. But by going on the community warning systems website, you can register for notifications. As I mentioned, input different addresses. I can't speak too much to the different language barriers. I know that for text messaging, some phones do allow for translation, but I would have to defer that to CWS staff to be able to explain the finer details of that process.
Thank you, because I know we spent a lot of time working on this several years ago, John, if you remember.
Yeah, right. So you're telling us what's happening with level 1 notifications, right?
Yeah, so in April of this year, we were directed by the supervisors to explore additional messaging for CWS level 1 notifications. As I stated, level 1 notifications are notifications only type messaging. So I want to talk a little bit about, what that looks like. So I know a question that we commonly hear is, why can't we just be notified for all level 1 incidents? And, a level 1 incident really, again, is something that is a threatened or actual release of a hazardous material that may or may not have gone off site. So just to give a little insight into the number of notifications our division receives, as of July 20th, 2023, we have received 136 level 1 notifications through our CWS system.
And this is countywide. This is countywide.
This is countywide, yes. And of those 136, 63 of those community warning system level 1s were for flaring that lasted longer than 20 minutes, which is about 50% of these being flaring incidents. So as you can see, really in looking at our evaluation, one of the things that we first have to determine is what really makes sense for a level 1 notification to be communicated out. So we avoid exactly what has been brought up. We do not want to over communicate to the public for incidents that are really having no impact to them and would not require any actions or further information for the community. So the next steps that we are taking is we are putting together a work group, which will also be soliciting community member input from residents surrounding large chemical facilities, because again, this is something we're looking at county-wide, not just for a specific area. We want to really understand and try and define the type of incident that would warrant notification to the community and how we get that method of communication out to the community. There will also be input with stakeholders from law enforcement, fire departments, regulatory agencies. We will be working with CARE, the Community Awareness Emergency Response Group, very closely on this. And then once that work group has met and come up with their suggested revisions, we will come back and present those revisions to the notification policy to this committee for consideration.
Okay.
And that is the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Any questions, Federal, before we go to public?
No.
Okay. Let's go to the public and then we can respond to any comments. Start with those in Martinez.
Are there any public comments in Martinez? No hands are raised here. We'll now go to Zoom. Please raise your hand in the Zoom app or press *9 if you're on the phone. Our first commenter will be Craig Lazarati.
Hi, thank you. So I'm glad to hear there'll be community involvement.
A little louder, Craig.
Oh, sorry. I'm glad to hear there'll be some community involvement in the process of revising the warning system for community alerts. I want to point out on the coke dust release, a big problem was the communication that went out on July 11th never made clear to the public, either through the social media posts or the email that was sent to residents, and never made clear to the public that it was a level 1 and what a level 1 means. And the important thing there is no offsite health impacts. And going back to our previous discussion or debate about coke dust and its impact on health, the fact of the matter is, if this dust was like the spent catalyst dust, or if it was heavy metal laden, it would have triggered a level 2, where there would have been the case with the spent catalyst. It was a level 1, and that meant no offsite consequences, but that was never conveyed to the public on July 11th. In fact, Contra Costa Health never conveyed it to the public until 3 days later when it sent out a follow-up email. So it's very clear when you do these alerts, because the nature of a community warning system alert is that it's going to create alarm by its nature. And sometimes you need to get the word out because people will jump to conclusions or things will spread word of mouth. But it's important that people have context and they know what the levels mean. Also, in reevaluating the system, there's a website, CWSalerts.com, for community warning system alerts. And apparently that website is not used for alerts for hazardous materials releases. Why that's the case, I'm not sure, but there is a notation at the top of that website about that be the place where alerts are posted. I get the impression, since it's from the sheriff's office, these are for higher level alerts that warrant some kind of shelter in place or public action. But I think that needs to be made clear to the public, because on July 11th, when word was spreading around the community, we were trying to figure out what was going on. I was looking at different websites to try to find out, where there was if there was an alert, and I was looking at that website, and apparently that was the wrong place. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think those comments about understanding context and all of that are important. I know will be considered when we look at how and where and when to expand notifications. It's like, what's the context? What does it mean? And this is not always an easy line about when to notify someone, when not to, when there's not a health impact. I know that what drove a lot of this, and I know Federal's dealt with this too, is, we've seen flaring that can sometimes be significant and look like a fire. So while there's not a shelter in place ordered, people wonder what to do. And I think that's what we want to let people know more of in that kind of case. This is what you need to do or not do. And because people will question, what do we do when they see this flare that looks like a fire?
Our next speaker will be call-in user 1.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
First of all, thank you so much, presenter. I really want to applaud you. You have held yourself extremely poised, knowledgeable, and withstanding all the interrogation and all the questioning of the supervisors and the public. So I have full confidence in your report as well as the investigation. And I want to thank you so much. I do want to respond and clarify some mistakes that Supervisor Joya has said about me. I am not from San Ramon. You are mistaken, as you always are, trying to guess who are who. And if you don't really know who Taiwanese or Chinese are, just ask them. Like sometimes I'm confused if you are Jewish or Italian. And I guess if I'm confused, I can just ask you. I don't pretend that I am a saint like you do, but indeed you are a racist. And what kind of racist is worse than just a racist, a corrupt racist who is getting money from communist China? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker will be
No response needed. No response needed. Okay, next speaker.
will be Heidi Taylor.
Hi all, I just can only speak for myself, and I am a big fan of more information. I can decide what's best for me, I can assess the danger, and I want that information. I understand that level 1 is about there being no offsite health consequences, but you know, I had black coke dust confirmed on my car. And so what you're asking me to do is accept that as normal when that's being deposited on my house and cars, and that is not normal. I do not want to accept that as normal. And at the very, I can't control the emissions, but I would ask that you really consider giving, at least for me, I would like more information about what is going on, and then I can take the necessary actions. Nicole, I appreciate the group that is forming. I am a little worried about how long this is going to take to implement, and how many more of these releases that I'm going to have to, wonder about. I will just tell you, Saturday night, I never expected to be sitting with guests in my front yard and having to explain a release. And I got notification at 10 o'clock. I had no idea that it had happened at 6. I didn't know what the consequences of it were. And it's just, that's unacceptable. We have Nixle. We get notified about all kinds of things, traffic collisions, baseball parades, et cetera. If there is some way that you can push out that information and people can choose to do with it what they will, I don't think that that is stoking panic or fear. It's just information so that they can make better decisions about their lives. Thank you so much. I so appreciate all of the comments from everyone here today. It's been a great meeting.
And a comment, I think, just of staff, to be clear, an offsite impact, coke dust falling in someone's yard is defined as an offsite impact, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so I think we're doing the same. Sometimes something like that can happen, and it is an offsite impact, so that would be a level 2, not a level 1, correct?
So I do want to clarify, the level 2 is something that has a release that goes off site and can have serious health impacts to those who may be sensitive or have chronic health conditions. A level 1 incident can have something go off site, but depending on the amount release, duration of release, there may not be health impacts. And so as we've said, every incident's different and we have to make those judgments.
So it sounds like, I think in the case of that coke dust falling, if it was determined that that didn't have any health consequences, it still had an offsite impact. And I think then people would want to know that that happened. How would we treat that?
So currently, the way that we treat that is that we do postings on our website and postings through our social media. For the example of Saturday night, there was messaging that went out on our social media and then an update message that went out once we confirmed that there were no offsite impacts. For the
So
July 11th incident, we also did media.
So the question is whether we send a text on that. I think
Yes.
that's right.
Yes.
And that's what we're evaluating is sending
Yeah,
text
so
messages.
that's what we will be looking at in this new review, is whether we send a text in that case. I sort of would distinguish between some release that, I don't know how to say this, that that may occur, that may have offsite impact, because not all releases have a dust component falling on your property, right? There's sometimes a release of something that maybe you don't smell, that has some minimal offsite impact, and it doesn't have a health impact. Obviously, if it has impact on people who have respiratory conditions, you let them know. So it's like, where's that line? A dust falling on something you can see, and dust falling on your property, I would put in a different category, and I know we'll get input on this, than something that may have some minimal offsite impact. But something you see, feel, and touch on your property, right? You may want to be notified about, because you have a question, is this dangerous or not? So I think that's the kind of input you're gonna get, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so Heidi, it sounds like that's gonna occur to get input on that exactly, and your sentiments noted. All right, next speaker.
The next speaker will be Charles Davidson.
Hello, county staff and supervisors and public. I'd like to comment that every day there's nearly a ton of PM 2.5 being released from the FCC alone at the refinery. And it's not dust, it's PM 2.5 that is highly penetrating into the lungs and deeper. And the dust that was measured by the air district was between 25 microns to 85 microns, which is over 1,000 times larger in volume than PM 2.5, and certainly even much more for less than PM 1, which crosses the blood-brain barrier. So we're talking really about structured nanomaterials with vanadium in, causing pulmonary fibrosis. So it's really a serious thing. This is going on constantly every single day, so we really need to understand this. It's pretty basic. It was really clear by the research that the Air District did, and I encourage county staff to really take a look at some of that research. And another thing too is there's opacity detectors that are commercially available all over the place. You just look it up. They're based on, using LED lights in a detector, and they can measure it. And unfortunately, right now, the refinery, when there's an opacity event, the Air District inspector might get out there a day later and then visually look up at the stack. There's no scientific measurements for opacity. So I think really the county needs to put pressure on the refinery to establish automated equipment that should be available online, that the Air District and county staff should be able to take a look when there is an opacity event. It's automated, and just like they talked about in the 72 or the incident report, that there needs to be more automation within the FCC itself in terms of pressure and temperature regulation. They should also have automated facility inside the stack itself as the particulate matter is exiting. So please take a look at PM 2.5 and consider a wet gas scrubber. They're also capable of mitigating a lot of the particulate matter that might be released in a major event.
Right.
Thank you very much.
And just to note, as an Air District member, so the Air District has already passed a rule that limits PM from these fluid catalytic cracking units by over 50%, by, forgot whether it's 70%. We're well aware of that. We passed the rule. As folks know, it's in litigation. I'm not sure what further we can do. But we're well aware of everything you said, Charles. And the Air District has passed a rule. And that rule, has a timeline, and we will see where that goes. And we're well aware of that.
The next speaker will be Maureen.
Hi. Couple questions or thoughts. We were talking about, level 1 and offsite health consequences not expected. That kind of doesn't exist. I live on the fence line of Phillips 66 refinery, and it flares, and there's always offsite consequences. So that was curious. And I believe that level 1 should include flaring events. I can see it off my porch. I can see the stacks where they flare, and I get tweaked every time. It concerns me. I have deja vu about New Star exploding. I would like to know what's going on. I would like to be notified for flaring events. And Nicole mentioned that would be 63 for flaring lasting longer than 20 minutes. 136 events, I don't want to know about, because I'm already kind of like, freaking out because I live next door to a refinery. I don't want to hear every single detail of spill or other releases, unless it's level 2, of course. So my recommendation would be just to focus on flaring for level 1. Other releases would be level 2. And one other thing is, I noticed, two other things, I'm sorry. It says you be notified for level 2 within 1,000 feet of the facility. Phillips is 1,100 acres. Who are you notifying here? No one lives that close to the refinery. Bayo Vista would be probably the only entity. I would like that to extend it to like at least 5,000 feet of the facility. I mean, having participated in the Protein Butane Recovery Act thing, where the BLEV zone was 7,000 feet, I think that 1,000 feet needs to be reconsidered to make it closer to 4,000 to 5,000 feet. Those people are actually living in the community. I don't know who at 1,000 feet. Are you notifying gophers? I'm not sure. And the other concern was quick. Oh, registered users. There's so few people who are registered. They don't know about this. And I will try to do my best. I'm going to be part of the Rodeo Chili Cook-Off, and I'm going to have a little card to register users, because people need to know they need to be registered. I'm section 118, so thank you.
Thank you. And I want to note it's not limited to 1,000 feet. You will notice in that slide, it said the health department will determine and do notifications beyond 1,000 feet if there's going to be impacts beyond that. I think it's clear the health department does notify beyond the 1,000 foot is like a default, and then it goes beyond 1,000 feet if they clearly believe there's a possibility that there will be impacts beyond that 1,000 feet. They notify that's in the policy, and that was on the slide. Second, we always are trying to do outreach, and it's important to get more people to register their cell phones until there's a change in this technology, right? Right now we have the reverse 911 directory. So that's why the warning system can automatically call people within zones based on their 911, the landlines. But since more and more people are using cells, we need to get those numbers in the system.
Thank you. That's great.
The next speaker will be Kathy.
Oh, hi. Quickly, I would just like to go back to the issue of breaking down the 1, 2, and 3 into areas that might be a little bit more descriptive. On-site, off-site, as far as site, and as far as impact, immediate impact versus chronic impact. I think chronic impact isn't really being looked at that much. Things that are actually not carcinogenic can also be deadly. So I'd like to see that I'd like to see more attention paid to chronic illnesses that are caused by large particles and small particles. And I want to appreciate everyone's responses and questions. This has been really a marvelous meeting. Thank you.
We have no additional comments.
Okay, and by the way, just as we note, the Air District just announced that it is assessed a $1.15 million penalty for air quality violations to a chemical plant in Richmond. That it had dealt with monitoring their sulfur dioxide emissions. And it looks like it involved, they failed to properly calibrate, operate, and maintain a monitoring system. This caused the monitoring system to underreport sulfur dioxide emissions by an estimated 33% per year on average. So that was a $1.15 million penalty against Chemtrade. So lots of good questions, comments, and it looks like this is moving forwards for some further public input. So we had a summary of the recent changes which expanded notifications under the community warning system and the process to get some further community input on some further possible changes and then come back to us. Federal, anything further?
No, I agree with the callers in terms of this meeting today. Very much informational, and I want to once again appreciate staff as well as the community members that have participated today.
Yes, great participation. Our next meeting, when is our next meeting?
We don't have it scheduled yet, Supervisor Joya,
Okay,
but I'll be working with your staff and Supervisor Glover's staff to schedule it.
sounds good. Everybody, thank you for your participation. It's now, there'll be further meetings of the oversight committee, and I know we'll be kept informed on that. And we appreciate with one notable exception, I will say, we appreciate the very meaningful public comments that have come in from residents, who really are working to, understand this and advocate for protection. And again, appreciate the refinery coming in person as well. It is important to have the cooperation of the local facility on all of this, and we want to go forward. Thanks.
Thank you.
The meeting is adjourned at 11:42 a.m. Thank you.